The morning sun cast long shadows across the busy downtown street as Sarah Mitchell hurried toward her yellow Vespa scooter. At 28, she had learned to navigate life's challenges with quiet determination. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore a crisp white t-shirt and red skirt, her uniform for the medical supply company where she worked part-time. Behind her, secured in the back seat of the scooter, was 2-year-old Emma, her bright-eyed daughter who had become her whole world since her husband left 3 years ago. The little girl's chubby hands clutched a small stuffed bear, her blonde curls catching the morning light. Sarah was running late, as usual. Between her job at the medical supply company in the mornings and her evening shift at the local diner, every minute mattered. The scooter was their lifeline, affordable transportation in a city where every dollar counted. As she bent down to check Emma's safety straps one more time, a commotion erupted nearby. A man in an expensive gray suit had collapsed on the sidewalk, his briefcase scattered beside him. People stood around, uncertain, taking photos with their phones rather than helping. Sarah's medical training, though limited to basic first aid from her job, kicked in immediately. Without hesitation, she left Emma safely strapped in the scooter and rushed to the fallen man. "Sir? Sir, can you hear me?" she called out, kneeling beside him. The man was in his early 50s, with graying hair and a face etched with pain. His breathing was shallow, his complexion pale. She quickly assessed the situation. Heart attack, most likely. Her hands moved with surprising confidence as she loosened his tie and checked his pulse. "Weak but steady. Someone call 911, she shouted to the crowd, then turned her attention back to the stranger. "It's going to be okay," she whispered, her voice gentle despite the urgency. "Just breathe with me." For what felt like hours but was only minutes, Sarah stayed by his side, monitoring his breathing, speaking softly to keep him calm. When the paramedics arrived, she quickly relayed his symptoms and vital signs with the precision of someone who understood medical emergencies. As they loaded him into the ambulance, the man's eyes met hers briefly. Even through his pain, she saw gratitude there and something else. A kind of recognition, as if he was memorizing her face. Sarah returned to Emma, who had watched the entire scene with wide, curious eyes. "Is the man going to be okay, Mama?" the little girl asked in her sweet voice. "I hope so, sweetheart," Sarah replied, starting the scooter. They were very late now, but some things were more important than punctuality. 3 weeks passed. Sarah had nearly forgotten about the incident when a knock came at her small apartment door one evening. She opened it to find a well-dressed woman holding an enormous bouquet of flowers. "Are you Sarah Mitchell?" the woman asked with a warm smile. "Yes." "My name is Margaret Chen. I work for Thomas Harrington, the man you helped downtown 3 weeks ago." "He's been trying to find you." Sarah's heart skipped. Is he all right?" "More than all right, thanks to you. The doctors said your quick thinking saved his life. Mr. Harrington would very much like to thank you properly. Would you consider having dinner with him tomorrow evening?" Sarah looked down at her worn jeans and simple sweater, then back at the elegant woman. I don't think we travel in the same circles." Margaret's smile widened. "Kindness doesn't recognize social circles, dear. And neither does gratitude." The restaurant was far fancier than anywhere Sarah had ever been. She'd borrowed a simple black dress from her neighbor and left Emma with Mrs. Peterson from downstairs. Her hands trembled slightly as she was led to a quiet corner table where Thomas Harrington waited. He stood as she approached, and she was struck by how different he looked from that day on the sidewalk. Distinguished, certainly, but there was a warmth in his eyes that money couldn't buy. "Sarah," he said, his voice rich with emotion, "I can never thank you enough." Over dinner, their conversation flowed like old friends reuniting. Thomas spoke of his work. He was indeed a CEO of a major corporation, but more importantly, he talked about his loneliness since his wife had passed 5 years earlier, about his grown children who lived across the country, about how that day on the sidewalk had made him realize how isolated he'd become. Sarah shared her own story, the struggles of single motherhood, her dreams of going back to school to become a nurse, the daily juggling act of making ends meet while trying to be everything Emma needed. "You saved my life in more ways than one," Thomas said as the evening wound down. Not just medically, but you reminded me what genuine human connection looks like. I just did what anyone would do, Sarah replied softly. But they didn't, Thomas said. Dozens of people saw me fall, and they reached for their phones, not their hearts. You reached with your heart first. As weeks turned into months, their friendship deepened naturally. Thomas would stop by the diner where Sarah worked evening shifts, always ordering coffee and pie, always leaving generous tips that Sarah initially tried to refuse. It's not charity, he would insist gently. It's friendship. Friends support each other. He met Emma, and the little girl took to him immediately, calling him Mr. Tom, and showing him her drawings with the unself-conscious joy that only children possess. Thomas would sit on the floor of their small apartment, playing blocks with Emma while Sarah prepared simple dinners that felt more meaningful than any business dinner he'd ever attended. She needs a father figure, Sarah's neighbor Mrs. Peterson observed one day. And if you ask me, you could use someone to lean on too, dear. Sarah had been thinking the same thing, but the differences in their world seemed insurmountable. What could she offer a man who had everything? The answer came one evening when Thomas arrived at the diner looking exhausted and defeated. Bad day? Sarah asked, pouring his usual coffee. The worst, he admitted. Board meeting. Hostile takeover attempt. I sat in that conference room for 8 hours, surrounded by people who've known me for decades, and realized I felt more alone than I did lying on that sidewalk. Sarah slipped into the booth across from him during her break. You know what I've learned about loneliness? She said quietly. It's not about how many people surround you. It's about whether those people truly see you. Thomas looked up at her, and in her eyes he found the same thing she'd given him that first day, genuine care, uncomplicated by agenda or expectation. I see you, Thomas, she continued. Not the CEO, not the money, not the fancy life. I see the man who reads bedtime stories to my daughter with the same attention he gives board presentations. I see someone who remembers that Mrs. Chen in apartment 3B likes certain flowers because you actually listen when people talk. I see your heart. That night, as he walked Sarah to her scooter after her shift ended, Thomas took her hand. I love you, he said simply. Not because you saved my life, but because you've shown me how to live it. 6 months later, they were married in a small ceremony in the park where Thomas had first met Emma. Sarah wore a simple white dress, Emma scattered flower petals, and Mrs. Peterson cried happy tears from the front row. Sarah went back to school, as she'd always dreamed, becoming the nurse she'd always wanted to be. Thomas learned to find joy in simpler pleasures, family dinners, bedtime stories, the sound of laughter in their home. Years later, when people would ask Sarah about that day downtown, she would smile and say, sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is simply to see them when they need to be seen. And sometimes when you open your heart to help another, you end up saving yourself too, Thomas would nod, remembering not just the day she saved his life, but all the days after when she taught him how to truly live it.